It's 24 minutes past 12. Government says it will this year be more aggressive in dealing with land reform and redistribution, saying land reform and redistribution programs have yielded some success since 1994, but large tracts of land still remain in the hands of very few people. That's a direct quote. President Zuma goes on to say government will this year start expropriating land for public purposes and in the public interest within the confines of the Constitution. Well, that is an issue that is likely to emerge at tomorrow night's State of the Nation address, and one of the key stakeholders in this important debate is Brian Whittaker from the Vumelana Advisory Fund. It plays in the public-private partnership space in this crucial sector. Brian, good afternoon to you. President Zuma's speech, say some, is an attempt by the ANC to silence its critics and reclaim its leadership of the land reform agenda, which has been overtaken by the EFF. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Land reform is a difficult process, and it would be for whoever is trying to implement it. Having said that, it is true that the process has proceeded too slowly to satisfy post-liberation expectations. It's also the case, though, that that much of the land that gets transferred is not economically productive. So I think in some ways more has been achieved than is realized. You know, in some of these statements, it's made to appear that nothing has happened, whereas, you know, having set a target to transfer 24.5 million hectares through the government's program, something like 8 million hectares has been transferred, and some analysts argue that if you included redistribution, restitution, and private transfers, that goes up to about 12.5 million. So, you know, sometimes the political statements are structured in such a way as to make it sound there's a problem here that's just not being addressed. It is being addressed, but it's not being addressed fast enough.
You've looked at 4 possible scenarios in terms of accelerating the process. What do those look like?
Well, we did this because we thought it was important for people to begin to think about the consequences of their actions. We got together a very diverse group of people and said, look, let's not argue with one another to try and persuade each other that we're right, but let's think about what could happen. And the 4 stories that emerged from that show what might happen by 2030. The first of those is a scenario that was called connection and capture. And in this, land reform opens the way for politically connected players to benefit at the expense of the poor. The kind of thing that might happen is, you know, government trying to hold on to its power, does a deal with traditional leaders where those leaders are provided with land, and eventually you get to the point where it's only the well-connected who benefit and the rest don't. The second scenario was called market power and concentration. Here, the racial profile of land ownership changes. So, but it results in a relatively small group of white landowners changing position with a relatively small group of blacker landowners, and the majority still feel excluded. So that was the second story. The third story we called occupation and confiscation. In this story, people get tired of waiting, and they decide to occupy land illegally, and we hear some talk about this. Eventually, in the story that was told, remember, these are only stories, they aren't forecasts or predictions, but they just help us think. In the story that was told, you know, the government eventually caves in, changes the constitution, and we get confiscation without compensation. The fourth scenario was called hard bargaining and compromise, based on an inclusive approach to land reform, where the government opens the opportunity for many players to participate, acknowledges the role that can be played by local communities, the private sector, the government, and so on, and requires hard bargains to be struck and compromises to be made, in terms of which nobody gets everything they want, but the process begins to move forward systematically.
Brian Whittaker, Executive Director at the Vumelana Advisory, thank you very much for joining us. The Save South Africa campaign today hosting a People's Assembly on what it says is the real state of the nation. The event is taking place at the St. George's Cathedral opposite Parliament in Cape Town. Save SA convener Sipho Patiana saying last week that the event is designed to allow South Africans to share their grievances about the current ANC government. The event started about